Some stories begin in the most ordinary places, but they have the power to reveal the deepest parts of who we are. What happens when a simple mistake at a bank turns into a life-changing moment? Imagine being treated unfairly by the system, only for a stranger, someone unexpected, to step in and change everything. This is not just a story about a mistake, it's about standing up for what's right and fighting for justice. Stay with us to discover how one woman's courage inspired a movement. But first, let us know where you're watching from, your city or country, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on stories that could change your life. Lena Carter, a kind-hearted woman in her late 70s, entered a busy downtown bank on a brisk autumn afternoon. The bank was overwhelmed with customers, people were impatient, and the air was thick with murmurs of frustration. The line stretched far back, and the employees scrambled to handle the chaos while everyone seemed to be glancing at their watches, eager to be done. Lena stood quietly, clutching a worn envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She had never expected her day to turn out this way. What seemed like a minor issue with her account had escalated into something much more important for her. These errors in her account weren't just mistakes, they represented a threat to her ability to survive financially. She took a deep breath, summoning the strength to face the situation. Today, she wasn't just another customer. Today, she was determined to get answers. With a quiet resolve, Lena stepped forward toward the service counter, hoping she could finally get the answers she desperately needed. Little did she know, her quest for justice would soon catch the attention of someone who could change everything. Lena took a step forward, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of the envelope in her hand as she approached the service counter. Behind the counter, Sarah Williams, a young employee, sat hunched over her computer screen, her fingers flying over the keys with little regard for the chaos unfolding around her. Lena hesitated for a moment, then gathered her courage and spoke softly. "Excuse me, I need help with my account," Lena said, her voice shaky but determined. Sarah barely glanced up, her eyes flicking to Lena for just a second before she returned to her screen, typing with mechanical precision. "How can I help you?" Sarah mumbled, not bothering to look at Lena. Lena's heart sank, but she pressed on. "There are charges on my account that I didn't authorize. I'm sure they're a mistake." Sarah sighed loudly, rolling her eyes in an exaggerated manner. "These charges are standard. They're all listed in your account agreement," she said dismissively, handing the envelope back to Lena without even scanning its contents. Lena's hands trembled as she tried to hold back the rising tide of frustration. "But I don't have enough money for these fees. I didn't know they would be this much. I've always kept my account in good standing. Can't you help me figure this out?" Without missing a beat, Sarah let out a sharp breath and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Ma'am, maybe you don't understand how things work these days. Banks have policies. These fees are automatic. There's nothing I can do about it." Lena felt small, belittled by the indifference in Sarah's voice. She glanced around, hoping for a sympathetic look from the others in the bank, but found only disinterested stares. The few customers near the counter whispered among themselves, casting quick glances at Lena as if her concerns were unimportant. "I just want to understand why these charges are here," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the weight of her embarrassment. But Sarah just smirked, her tone dripping with condescension. "If you want to avoid these fees, you need to keep more money in your account. It's simple. That's how it works." Lena's chest tightened, the sting of public humiliation settling in as the crowd around her continued to murmur. The clerk's words had the power to diminish her. "It can't be this way," Lena thought to herself, trying desperately to steady her breathing. "I just need someone to listen." But it wasn't until a man stepped forward from across the room that things began to shift. At first, Lena didn't even notice him. He looked like just another face in the crowd. But as he walked towards the counter, his confident stride and sharp gaze immediately drew attention. There was something different about him. "Why are you speaking to her like that?" the man asked, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. The entire bank fell silent. Lena blinked in shock, her eyes widening as all attention turned to the stranger who had intervened. The man, wearing a simple jacket and a baseball cap, didn't look like anyone special at first. But his presence was commanding, and the weight of his words carried an undeniable force. Sarah and the others froze. No one expected this. The man's voice cut through the tension in the bank like a knife. "Why are you treating this lady like this?" he repeated, his tone unwavering. Lena's eyes widened in disbelief. Could it be? Was this man really standing up for her? The entire room seemed to freeze, every eye now trained on the figure who had interrupted Sarah. For a brief moment, it was as if time stood still. No one dared to speak, and the hum of the busy bank fell silent. Lena watched in stunned silence as the man, who had been walking casually across the room, slowly approached the counter. Sarah and the other bank employees exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to react. They clearly hadn't expected someone to challenge their authority in such a direct way. The man didn't raise his voice, but there was an undeniable authority in his words. He locked eyes with Sarah and asked, "Do you really think it's okay to treat customers like this? Especially when they're trying to get help?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected someone, let alone a complete stranger, to come to her defense in a moment like this. She could feel a surge of gratitude, mixed with confusion. Why was this happening? Who was he? Sarah, flustered by the unexpected confrontation, stammered. I am just following the rules," she said weakly, trying to maintain her composure. "This is how the bank operates. These fees are..." The man interrupted her before she could finish. "Rules? Is that what you're going to hide behind? Rules that hurt people?" He glanced down at Lena, then back at Sarah, his gaze firm and unyielding. By now, the tension in the room was palpable. The customers who had previously been disinterested were now watching, drawn in by the unfolding drama. Some exchanged whispers, others took out their phones, but all eyes were on the scene at the counter. Lena felt her breath catch in her chest. She wanted to say something, anything, but the situation was so overwhelming. Her eyes glanced at the man again. There was something about him, something familiar, though she couldn't place it. But before she could think more on it, the man, with an air of finality, turned to the rest of the room and said, "If you're going to stand by and watch this, then you're complicit. No one should be treated this way, especially not by a company that's supposed to serve its people." The atmosphere in the bank had shifted completely. The customers, who had once been indifferent, now looked around at each other, some visibly uncomfortable, others seemingly in awe of the man's boldness. The man had taken control of the situation, and with each passing second, Lena felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Sarah stood frozen, unsure how to respond. It wasn't just the man's words that had shaken her, it was the intensity with which he spoke and the confidence in his actions. There was something undeniably powerful about his presence. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice now calm but firm. "You're going to fix this. Now." The words rang out with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. Lena's heart raced as she realized that the situation was no longer just about her. It was about something much bigger. This man, whoever he was, wasn't just standing up for one person, he was standing up for what was right. The man, still standing tall, didn't seem to be moving anytime soon. His presence was almost magnetic, and for a moment, it felt like all the air in the bank had been sucked out. Every single person in the room was watching intently, waiting for the next move. Lena's heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't quite believe what was happening. This was no ordinary person, no passerby just trying to be helpful. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. Sarah, who had been so dismissive just moments before, now stood frozen. She seemed unsure of what to do next, looking to her colleagues for guidance, but receiving none. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. It was then that Lena noticed something even more surprising. As the man turned to address the rest of the room, a subtle shift in his demeanor caught her attention. He wasn't just defending her. There was something deeper in his words, something that struck at the very heart of what had been happening in this bank for far too long. "Let me make something clear," the man began, his voice carrying an edge of calm authority. "This isn't about one person being wronged. This is about a system that's set up to prey on the vulnerable. And it's time for that to change." Lena's eyes widened. The man, who, until now, had seemed like a stranger, was speaking about a larger problem. He wasn't just calling out the mistreatment of one elderly woman. He was calling out the entire system of greed that had been operating under the surface, the way customers were being exploited without their knowledge. Lena felt a sense of clarity begin to settle in. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a deeper issue, something that affected so many others, many of whom were probably sitting in this very bank, quietly enduring the same treatment she had. She thought about the other elderly people she had seen around the bank, struggling with their accounts. Had they been victims of this system too? The man's words hung in the air, heavy with significance. "It's time for everyone to take responsibility," he continued, now directing his gaze to the staff behind the counter. "What happens to Lena today isn't just about fixing her account. It's about fixing what's broken in this entire system." Lena swallowed hard. She had spent so much time worrying about her own small problem, but now she could see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about a few accidental charges. It was about fairness. It was about standing up against a system that took advantage of people like her, people who were often overlooked and treated as if their struggles didn't matter. The man didn't stop. He turned back to Sarah, who was still standing there, her eyes darting nervously between him and her colleagues. "You have the power to fix this," he said firmly. "You can right this wrong. Don't hide behind policies that only serve to protect your profits." The power of his words was undeniable. Lena could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The weight that had settled on her chest just moments ago was lifting, replaced by something new, something like hope. Maybe there was a chance to change the way things were. The man placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll get this taken care of. You're not alone." At that moment, Lena realized just how much this man's actions had already changed her. He had given her not just the strength to stand up for herself, but the courage to stand up for others too. She wasn't just a helpless customer anymore. She was part of something bigger, a movement for fairness and justice. The bank had descended into a tense silence. Everyone in the room, from the employees behind the counters to the other customers, was watching as the man, whose presence had already caused such a stir, stood beside Lena. For the first time, the bank felt like a place where change could happen, where justice wasn't just a word on paper but something that could be fought for and won. Lena felt the change in the air as she stood next to this stranger who had given her a voice. It wasn't just about fixing her account anymore, it was about something far bigger. Something she couldn't have imagined when she first walked into the bank that afternoon. The man, David Ellis, as Lena would learn later, had turned from an unexpected hero into the advocate of a larger movement. It wasn't just about correcting a simple mistake, it was about fighting for the dignity and respect of every person who had been exploited by the system. His words had sparked a fire, and Lena could see it in the way the other customers were looking at each other, as if they were beginning to see that they, too, had the power to demand better treatment. David glanced at Lena, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "The bank isn't going to change unless you give them a reason to." His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that seemed to echo around the room. It wasn't just a pep talk, it was a call to action. Lena nodded, her heart swelling with newfound resolve. She'd been overwhelmed by the bureaucracy, the confusion, the frustration of dealing with something that felt so small, yet so monumental. But now, standing next to David, she realized that this was her chance to make a difference, not just for herself but for everyone who had been affected by the system's indifference. The bank employees were visibly shaken. Sarah, who had once been dismissive, now stood frozen, her eyes darting nervously between David and her colleagues. Todd Murphy, the manager, had stepped back, his face pale and his posture stiff. He seemed unsure of what to do next, but David wasn't done yet. "Here's the thing," David continued, his voice still calm but sharp. "This isn't just a one-time fix. It's not enough to simply refund Lena's account. This is about making sure that no one else ever has to go through this again." Lena's eyes widened at his words. This wasn't about an apology. It wasn't just about returning money that had been wrongly taken. David was talking about creating a systemic change. He was talking about making the bank accountable for what had been happening to people like her, people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and exploited for too long. David turned to Todd, who was standing silently, clearly uncomfortable. "You will correct this mistake, not just for Lena, but for every customer affected. And you will do it immediately." His words were like a command, and for the first time, Todd seemed to recognize that there was no way out. David wasn't simply demanding a refund for Lena, he was demanding transparency, justice, and a complete overhaul of the bank's practices. It was clear that this was a fight not just for Lena's dignity, but for the dignity of countless others. Lena, still in shock, could hardly believe what was happening. For the first time in her life, she felt like her voice mattered, like she wasn't just a helpless bystander in the face of a powerful system. She had an opportunity, a chance to make sure this injustice didn't happen to anyone else. David glanced back at her, offering a reassuring smile. "You've got this," he said softly. "And now, you're not alone anymore." The rest of the customers in the bank were watching in stunned silence, but for the first time, Lena felt a sense of empowerment. She wasn't just fighting for her own account, she was fighting for the respect and fairness that every person deserved. As the minutes ticked by, Lena stood beside David, feeling an unfamiliar strength building inside her. The initial shock of the situation was fading, replaced by a sense of clarity. She no longer felt like a helpless bystander in her own story. This wasn't just about the money that had been wrongfully charged to her account, it was about standing up for herself, her rights, and the rights of others who had been silenced for too long. David Ellis had given her the courage to fight, but it was Lena who was now taking charge. She could feel her spine straightening, her breath coming easier. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She wasn't just another elderly woman at the mercy of a system that didn't care. She was a force, a voice that refused to be silenced. Lena looked around the room. The customers who had once been passive observers were now watching her, some with curiosity, others with admiration. They had seen the injustice, heard David's words, and now they were witnessing Lena, the woman who had once been too afraid to speak up, standing tall in the face of adversity. David, sensing the shift in Lena, offered a quiet nod of approval. "You're doing great," he said, his voice warm with encouragement. "This is how change happens, one person, one voice at a time." Lena felt a surge of gratitude for him, but also for herself. She had always believed that the system was too big to fight against, that her voice wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But now, standing in this bank, she realized something powerful: the system only remains broken if people like her stay silent. The tension in the air was palpable as the employees scrambled behind the counter. Todd Murphy, the manager, was clearly rattled. His earlier bravado had evaporated, and now he seemed to be searching for a way out. But there was no escape from the truth that David had exposed. The charges Lena had been hit with weren't just an isolated mistake, they were part of a larger, systemic issue that had been going on for far too long. Lena turned to Todd, her voice steady but firm. "You're going to fix this," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "And you're going to do it right now. Because this isn't just about me. It's about all the people you've taken advantage of. The elderly, the vulnerable, they deserve respect." For the first time, Todd didn't have a response. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he stammered, I'll look into it. I'll make it right." David gave a slight smile, a knowing look passing between him and Lena. He had lit the spark, but it was Lena who was now standing at the forefront, demanding justice. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't going to let this happen to her or anyone else again. "Good," David said, his tone final. "This isn't just about money. It's about doing what's right. And now, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again." Lena nodded, her hands now steady. She wasn't just asking for fairness for herself, she was demanding it for everyone who had been wronged. She could feel the shift within her, the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet but unwavering strength. As Todd began to work on correcting the charges, Lena looked back at David, a silent thank you in her eyes. She knew that, no matter, the tension in the bank was now palpable, but it was no longer one of discomfort. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if everyone knew something profound was about to unfold. The employees, though visibly shaken, were now working quickly to correct the error. Todd was typing furiously, glancing up occasionally to meet David's unwavering gaze. His unease was palpable, but he knew there was no turning back. Lena, standing beside David, felt a quiet pride swelling inside her. She could hear the tapping of keys and the soft murmurs of the customers behind her, but it all felt distant. The world around her had shifted. No longer was she just the elderly woman who had been humiliated in the bank, she was part of something bigger. A movement for justice. A symbol of standing up against the system that had tried to silence her. David had stayed by her side the entire time, offering steady support without saying much more. He had given her the strength to fight, but now she was doing it on her own. Her actions, her voice, her determination, they mattered. And that realization was more powerful than anything. As Todd finally printed out the corrected statements and handed them to Lena, his face was flushed with embarrassment. He didn't look her in the eye as he spoke, his voice shaking. I'm sorry, ma'am. We've corrected the charges. Everything should be as it was before." Lena took the papers from him, but she didn't just feel relief, she felt something far more profound. She had fought for this. She had fought for justice, and now, the system had to acknowledge her. It wasn't just about fixing her account, it was about reclaiming her dignity. David watched Lena carefully, then turned to the rest of the room. "This is what happens when you refuse to stay silent," he said, his voice carrying with authority. "This is how we change the world, one voice at a time. Never let anyone tell you that you don't matter, because you do. Your voice, your actions, they matter." The words hung in the air, powerful and clear. There was a moment of silence as Lena processed everything that had just happened. The humiliation, the frustration, the helplessness, all of it had melted away, replaced by something far stronger: empowerment. She had faced a giant, and she had won. The other customers, who had been passive observers up until now, began to clap. It started as a few tentative claps but quickly grew into a resounding applause. Everyone in the room was moved by what they had witnessed: the courage of one woman standing up against a system that had tried to break her, and the unwavering support of a man who had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change was possible. David smiled at Lena, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "You did it," he said softly. "You made a difference." Lena, her heart swelling with gratitude, simply nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." With the issue resolved, David turned to leave, but before he walked out the door, he paused. He looked back at Lena and the others, his voice clear and inspiring. "Remember, change starts with us. Don't ever let fear stop you from doing what's right. You all have the power to make a difference." As he walked out of the bank, the room seemed to come alive with energy, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. Lena looked around at the customers, now standing tall, their eyes filled with admiration. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. And as Lena left the bank that day, she carried with her more than just a resolution to a mistake. She carried the power of knowing that she could stand up for herself, and that her actions could change the world. Lena's journey that afternoon was more than just about a bank mistake. It was a powerful reminder that every person, no matter their age, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The experience taught her that it's not enough to accept things as they are when they're unjust. Sometimes, standing up and speaking out can make all the difference. Lena learned that she had the power to demand change, not just for herself, but for others too. She discovered that one person's voice, no matter how small it may seem, can spark a movement. It was a profound reminder that justice isn't always easy to obtain, but it is always worth fighting for. This experience left Lena with the conviction that she would never again allow herself to be silenced or overlooked. Lena's story is a call to action for all of us. Whether you're dealing with an issue at work, in your community, or facing any type of injustice, remember that your voice matters. Don't hesitate to speak up and demand what is rightfully yours. You never know when your actions might inspire others to stand up alongside you. Just like Lena, you have the power to create change, even in the most difficult circumstances.